Beneath Ohio's rolling hills lie stories that predate the state itself. Civilizations that map the heavens in earth and clay. Ceremonial cities drawn with a geometer's hand, and effigies coiled like living myths across the ridgelines. The textbooks tell one tale. The soil tells another. Tonight, we follow that older voice. We will trace a serpent longer than city blocks as it bites toward the solstice sun. Step into Hopewell landscapes where circles, squares, and octagons speak a language of moon and season. And stand on ridges where guardians of the underworld watch the valleys below. From Newark's lunar observatory to Mound City's houses of fire and farewell. From river-born sanctuaries at Marietta to solitary enigmas hidden deep in the woods. This is a journey through a sacred map etched into Ohio itself. Stay with us to the end. When the patterns align sky to earth, past to present, and the oldest mysteries of the Midwest look back at us, still very much alive. Follow the ridge line in Adams County, and the land begins to move under your feet. A long back rises, then dips, then rises again. A sinuous climb that ends in a head poised toward the horizon. This is Serpent Mound, the world's largest effigy mound. A 1,348-foot coil of earth that winds across the spine of a hill like a living glyph. From above, the form is unmistakable. A serpent uncoiling in deliberate curves, its head lifted toward an oval, an egg to some, a sun to others, caught at the moment of creation, or perhaps devouring, or perhaps simply holding the sky in its jaws. Whatever the image meant to its builders, it still strikes us the same way it must have long ago, as a statement meant to be seen from the heavens and felt in the bones. The mystery starts with time, though for years. The serpent was attributed to the Adena culture, whose legacy in Ohio stretches from roughly 1000 BCE to 200 BCE, supported by nearby conical burial mounds that bear their signature, but radiocarbon dates drawn from materials within the effigy shifted the story forward, pointing to a construction around 1070 CE. That date turns our gaze to the fort ancient culture, active in the region from about 1000 to 1650 C. And yet the serpent refuses a simple answer. Some scholars see a palimpsest in its curves, a project begun in Adena days, reshaped or renewed centuries later by fort ancient hands. In that layered reading, Serpent Mound is not a single event, but a long conversation, sustained across generations, between people and place. Purpose, too, resists the ordinary. There are no burials within the serpent's body, no cache of grave goods to narrate its use. Instead, the clues lie in orientation and light. Stand at the head on the summer solstice, and the sun sets exactly where the serpent points. Move along the body and other nodes align with the winter solstice and the equinoxes, as if each curve were a mark on a calendar you walk rather than hang. This is architecture that counts time, teaches season, and binds ceremony to the sky. Imagine the gatherings. People climbing the ridge at dawn or dusk. Songs rising with the wind. The year turning not on a page, but in the body of a serpent that never moves, and yet forever measures motion. Then there is the ground itself, which carries its own cosmic echo. Serpent Mound sits on the rim of an ancient impact structure. The Serpent Mound disturbance, a scar left by a meteorite hundreds of millions of years ago. Did the builders know? Perhaps not in geologic terms, but they chose this charged topography, all the same. Fractured stone, a ridgetop vantage, the sense that earth and sky once collided here and might speak more clearly for it. The placement lends the site a feeling that draws speculation of earth energies, of a landscape humming with memory. Whether or not those readings are right, the choice of terrain was not accidental. The serpent commands a view and a feeling that ordinary ground cannot supply. If the oval before the head is an egg, it is the world being born. If it is the sun, it is life's fire cradled in a mouth that belongs to the underworld. Across many native traditions, serpents thread transformation, renewal, and beneath the surface power, coupled with precise solar and lunar sightlines, the effigy fuses cosmology with ceremony, a visible theology you can traverse in an afternoon and contemplate for a lifetime. And think, too, of the labor, the baskets of soil passed hand to hand, the shaping, the smoothing, all without metal tools, all for a structure that contains no bodies and holds no grain. What it holds is meaning, fixed in earth. Today, Serpent Mound is protected as a National Historic Landmark, cared for by the Arc of Appalachia and the Ohio History Connection. Visitors circle the perimeter, climb the tower, and try, as ever, to see what the builders saw, a horizon caught at exactly the right angle, a serpent aligned with the turning year, a ridge that remembers fire from the sky. The serpent keeps its counsel, but in the play of light across its curves, solstice to solstice, you can still read the intention. To anchor human life to the dance of heaven and the pulse of a very particular hill. Step off the serpent's ridge and the landscape opens into a wider grammar. Circles, squares, and octagons stitched across southern Ohio, like sentences in a language as old as starlight. Here we enter the world of the Hopewell, a network of communities who, between about 100 BCE and 400 CE, reshaped the ground itself into ceremonial maps. Their earthworks, immense enclosures spanning hundreds of meters, are not random heaps of soil but measured propositions in geometry. They circles near perfect in their curvature, squares set with uncanny accuracy, octagons that seem to speak in lunar syllables, across more than 150 kilometers. At least 8 major sites now recognized together as UNESCO World Heritage. The Hopewell ceremonial earthworks, the pattern repeats, sacred forms drawn to a scale that demands both discipline and vision. To understand the Hopewell, imagine a calendar you can walk, a sanctuary you can see from the sky, and a convocation ground where trade and ceremony blur into a single act. These were not fortresses and not farms. They are ceremonial landscapes, carefully layered. Builders stacked soils, a foundation of one kind, a cap of another, then raised walls that once stood shoulder high and higher, guiding movement the way architecture in stone does elsewhere. As at Newark, Chillicothe, and beyond, long parallel avenues connected enclosures, processional ways that choreographed gatherings so that every step carried meaning. You did not merely arrive, you entered a story. Astronomy threads that story. The Hopewell learned to place their forms where sky and horizon perform with precision. In Newark, the octagon and its paired circle track an 18.6-year lunar cycle, marking the moon's furthest wander north and south. Elsewhere, orientations echo the turning of seasons, sunrise and sunset, at solstice and equinox. Such alignments require patience, observation across generations, and a culture willing to translate sky time into earth shape. It is not mathematics for its own sake. It is theology in the open air, a way to live inside the rhythms that govern planting, gathering, mourning, and renewal. The people who gathered here did more than watch the heavens. Excavations at Hopewell sites reveal an economy of meaning carried by objects from far horizons. Obsidian knives with edges born in the Rocky Mountains, thin gleaming sheets of copper hammered into breastplates, mica cut into intricate designs, shells lifted from Gulf waters and carried inland by many hands. These were not trinkets. They were instruments and offerings, proof of affiliation stretching across the continent, and tokens invested with the kind of value measured in story and ceremony rather than simple trade. Burial mounds within or near these enclosures hold cremated remains, tombs framed by charnel structures that were burned and then entombed. The flames themselves part of the rite. Each interment is a page in a communal anthology, names unrecorded, meanings still legible. If Serpent Mound is a single striking sentence, the Hopewell ceremonial complexes are chapters revisited, revised, and revered later. Cultures, including the fort, ancient people, return to some of these places, adding their own layers and preserving a continuity of sacred use that survived long after the builder's tools were set down. For a time, scholars tried to give this work to a lost race, unable or unwilling to see the clear line from these earthworks to the ancestors of native nations who speak of sky and land as kin. That misreading has been corrected. The 2023 UNESCO recognition is more than a laurel. It is a public acknowledgement that these sites are among humanity's great works, monuments of geometry, yes, but also of social organization, shared ritual, and a cosmology grounded in place. Stand within one of these enclosures, and you can feel the scale pull at you. The walls do not tower, they suggest. The circle does not confine, it gathers. Here, the earth itself is the instrument, tuned to moonrise and solstice, to procession and return. Our next steps will focus that feeling on a single score written in clay. Newark, where the moon's long breath is inscribed into an octagon, so vast it needs years to be read. The Hopewell language of geometry reaches a kind of crescendo at Newark, where the ground itself reads like an astronomical manuscript, once spanning more than 4 square miles. The Newark earthworks braided precise shapes with long earthen avenues, connecting ceremonial spaces into a single breadth of landscape. What survives today, the Great Circle, the octagon earthworks, and the right earthworks still speaks clearly enough. Here, geometry is not an abstraction, but a choreography for people, seasons, and sky. Begin at the Great Circle, a near-perfect ring almost 1,200 feet across. Its earthen wall once rose to heights that can still make you feel small. And inside it runs a broad ditch, not for defense but for design, an interior moat that amplifies separation from the everyday world. At the center, a large mound anchors the circle, a stage for ritual, or a platform for those who carried songs, speeches, or prayers. The circle is less a room than a horizon turned inward, a place where the community gathered within a form as pure and encompassing as the sky itself. Follow the old processional ways, those paired embankments that once linked enclosures, and you arrive at the octagon earthworks, Newark's most astonishing proposition. The octagon, stitched to a great circle by parallel walls, stretches across nearly 50 acres. Its angles and sightlines are not merely neat. They are necessary. Researchers discovered that the octagon is keyed to the moon's 18.6-year cycle, the major lunar standstill. When the moon rises and sets at its extreme points on the horizon, and to encode that pattern, you need patient observation, elders remembering what their elders saw, and a willingness to carve those memories into the ground at a scale that can hold them. Every berm becomes a sightline, every angle, a note in a melody you can only hear by waiting years for the refrain to return. Newark's alignment is more than a star chart. Imagine the communal rhythm it demanded. Children who first walked the embankments at one moonrise would be adults before the cycle completed. Some would bring their own children to watch the moon repeat its wide arc. Ceremony here is time-embodied people returning to the same gates, the same angles, to greet a sky that keeps its promises on a schedule longer than a single life. In that sense, the octagon is a contract with memory, binding generations through a ritual of attention. Not every part of Newark looks ancient. At first glance, portions of the octagon stand within a modern country club. The fairways draped over sacred geometry like a second skin. Yet even here, preservationists and native communities negotiate time and use, working with the Ohio History Connection to maintain access and respect. Walk the berms, and you can still feel the architecture do its work, guiding feet and eyes toward openings that cut the horizon into precise apertures. The right earthworks, more fragmentary today, remind us that the original complex included additional walls and enclosures, a fuller grammar of shapes whose syntax we can only partly reconstruct. As with other Hopewell centers, Newark was no isolated shrine. Excavations across the ceremonial landscape reveal the same constellation of far-traveled materials: obsidian from the Rockies, mica from the Appalachians, copper hammered thin and bright, shells lifted from Gulf waters. These were placed with intent, not stored as loot, but used as instruments of meaning in rites that joined the living, the dead, and the sky. The earthworks did their part: walls to guide processions, nodes to mark the turning year, open spaces, scaled to hold the many. Recognition has caught up, at least in part. In 2023, the Hopewell ceremonial earthworks, including Newark, were inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, affirming what the ground has always implied. These are works of global significance, not only for their geometry, but for the culture that could imagine and sustain it. Stand at an octagonal gateway and wait for twilight. The moon lifts, the horizon tilts, and for a moment you understand how a landscape becomes an instrument, and how, in Newark, the instrument still plays. Follow the Scioto River south to Ross County, and the earth begins to whisper in a different register. I hear. Inside a near-perfect rectangle of about 13 acres, 23 conical mounds rise and fall like held breaths. This is Mound City, one of the Hopewell world's most eloquent places of parting, where architecture, ritual, and remembrance were fused in fire. The enclosure is not lofty, but it is exacting. At its walls once defined a precinct, set apart from ordinary life, a measured ground where the living negotiated with the dead, and with the powers that govern both. Beneath several of these mounds, archaeologists found the signatures of ceremony rendered in wood and flame. Before the earth was heaped, charnel houses stood here, carefully built wooden structures, where bodies were prepared, honored, and, in many cases, cremated. The buildings themselves were part of the rite, used, emptied, intentionally burned, and then sealed forever beneath smooth, earthen domes. Each mound became a reliquary for a vanished room, a chamber of ash and intention. In that cremation and burial sequence, we glimpse the Hopewell understanding of transformation. Fire as the threshing floor between worlds, smoke lifting prayers, embers knitting the community to its ancestors. From those rooms of ash came objects that still catch the breath, artifacts less like possessions than like vocabulary, from a sacred language, intricately carved stone pipes shaped into animals and spirits, thin copper breastplates hammered to a sheen that must have flashed like water at noon, micaceous sheets cut into gleaming forms, catching firelight, bear and shark teeth that migrated inland as tokens of relationship with far coasts and deep waters, razor-black obsidian blades, whose edges were born in the Rocky Mountains and carried across a continent by exchange networks, bound as much by meaning as by trade. These are not trophies. They are instruments and emblems, placed to bind the deceased to the cosmos and the community to its story. What emerges at Mound City is not the footprint of an empire, but the choreography of a network. The Hopewell world was a constellation of communities linked by shared ceremony rather than a single throne. People journeyed here for gatherings, seasonal rites, funerary observances, exchanges of goods and vows, moving along rivers that acted as both road and metaphor. The rectangular precinct and its mounds shaped that movement: where to stand, when to enter, how to witness. You did not come merely to look. You came to participate in a script the earth itself supplied. The script was nearly erased. During World War I, the U.S. Army established Camp Sherman over these grounds, leveling and scarring the site in the rush of mobilization. Barracks lined what had been sacred precincts. Roads cut the memory of processional ways. The damage could have been final. Instead, the story bent back toward care. In the decades that followed, archaeologists mapped what remained, and restoration work lifted Mound City from near oblivion into the heart of what is now Hopewell Culture National Historical Park. There, an interpretive center gives context to the artifacts and the architecture, to the wood, ash, and earth from which so much meaning was made. Stand within the enclosure today, and the modern world thins. The mounds are measured, not massive. Their authority is quiet, cumulative. You can imagine the structures beneath beams, posts, rafters, then the blaze that ended each house and began each mound. You can imagine the processions, the songs, the smoke, and for many native communities, Mound City remains exactly what it has always been. A sacred place where continuity is not a metaphor but a practice. For historians and visitors, it is a rare window into a society that understood how to make landscape carry memory and how to let fire write the chapter's last line. Mound City teaches that the Hopewell genius was not only geometric or astronomical, it was social and spiritual. A capacity to orchestrate work, grief, and celebration into a single act of meaning. When you leave, you carry the paradox at its heart. A city built to honor endings, whose careful design ensures the story continues. Travel a short way from Mound City, and the Hopewell landscape swells again into measured grandeur. Here in the fertile valleys of Ross County, the Seip, often written Seip or Seip Earthworks, unfurl as a vast ceremonial grammar. A nearly perfect circular enclosure, roughly 1,200 feet in diameter, tethered to a square and a smaller circle by long, ruler-straight embankments. Even in ruins hush, the geometry remains persuasive. Stand at a breach in the wall and the horizon arranges itself. The embankments become sentences, the gateways punctuation. And at the center of this design, Seip Mound dominates the scene, an enormous conical burial monument that once rose to about 30 feet and extended more than 240 feet in length through staged construction. It is less a single heap than a layered archive. Excavations reveal a sequence of mortuary structures, wooden, carefully built, ritually used, then burned or dismantled and sealed beneath new lifts of soil. Each stage holds its own chapter. Cremations performed with formal precision, offerings placed as if composing a prayer that required copper's gleam, mica's shine, and obsidian's dark edge to be fully heard. The mound's growth over time reads like a long ritual sentence, revised and reaffirmed as generations return to honor their dead. The artifacts recovered from Seip speak in the same far-traveled dialect we have heard elsewhere across the Hopewell world. There are copper ornaments, breastplates, and adornments hammered thin with an almost liquid brilliance. There are carved stone pipes, effigies that turn animals and spirits into breath-bearing instruments. There are mica cutouts that catch and throw light, as if ritual were meant to be seen as much as sung. Obsidian blades arrive like condensed twilight from the Rocky Mountains, while marine shells whisper of distant coasts. None of this reads as casual trade. It is ceremonial economy, a choreography of exchange that turns geography into relationship, and relationship into rite. Seip does more than hold the dead. It organizes the living, the great circles, gateways, and the connecting walls choreograph procession. Where to enter, how to move, when to pause, so that a solar rise or a lunar set arrives within a framed sightline. The hints of astronomical intention linger in the alignments, suggesting a calendar embedded in Earth, a template for timing the thresholds of the year and the turning points of communal life. The geometry is not an abstract exercise, it is a practical sanctity. People gathered, grieved, feasted, vowed, and remembered along axes that married cardinal direction to cosmic rhythm. Hierarchy leaves its trace here as well. Within Seip Mound, burials vary in complexity and abundance, indicating a social mosaic more textured than simple equality. Some individuals were accompanied by richer arrays of offerings or placed within more elaborate mortuary settings, a pattern that suggests roles of leadership, spiritual authority, or lineage prominence. Yet even these distinctions sit inside a larger public architecture, implying that status, however expressed, was ultimately folded back into the shared work of ceremony and the common ground that held it. Like much of the Hopewell legacy, Seip suffered from time, field, and plow. But careful mapping, excavation, and partial reconstruction have returned the site to clarity within Hopewell culture. National Historical Park. Today, walking trails trace the vanished embankments, interpretive waysides open the archive beneath your feet, and a reconstructed portion of Seip Mound gives volume to what the eye struggles to supply. Indigenous-led programs and consultations continue to shape how the site is presented, reminding all visitors that these are not merely archaeological curiosities, but sacred places with living descendants and present-tense meaning. Stand at Seip's circle and let your gaze ride the low swell of the wall. The landscape begins to sort itself into memory, a line of people moving between earthen banks, a fire catching in a wooden mortuary house, a copper plate glittering at the edge of ceremony, a moonrise slipping into a designed aperture. Geometry holds it all without raising its voice. Here, the Hopewell made a sanctuary from measure and memory, and left a map for how to gather precisely, reverently, together. They leave the grand geometry of Seip and climb a different ridge, this one above the Raccoon Creek Valley near Granville. The air thins into distance. The land below spreads like a painted scroll. Here, the earth rises not as circle or square, but as a creature 250 feet from open-jawed head to tapering tail, roughly 76 feet across at its broadest, 4 limbs pressed into the slope as if bracing against an invisible current. Locals long called it the alligator, but the name may be a mask that slipped over an older face. Look again, and you might see something else. A panther stretched on a prow, an underwater serpent surfacing to breathe, a guardian spirit poised at the seam between worlds. Whatever it represents, the effigy holds its place like a sentinel, a living idea shaped in soil. Unlike burial mounds, this body of earth contains no graves and offers no cache of goods to explain itself. Its meaning is written instead in posture and position. The effigy sits on a high ridge with commanding views, an elevated stage where ritual could meet horizon. And from this height, the valley becomes both audience and altar fields unrolling like pages, water glinting as it works its patient line through the hills. Such placement is never accidental in a landscape where ceremony is choreography. People ascend, breath changes, and the ground teaches the body how to move. And who built the guardian? The timeline suggests the fort ancient culture, active from around 1000 to 1650 CE, though some scholars edge the clock earlier, into the late Hopewell afterglow. The forms and the date range around add 801,200 point to fort, ancient hands shaping baskets of earth into limb, chest, and jaw. If so, the effigy becomes kin to Serpent Mound's later dating, a reminder that sacred labor did not end with the Hopewell, but continued in new idioms, fewer geometric cities, more singular beings set like markers along the high places. Identity matters because it opens meaning. If this is an alligator, an animal strangers to this latitude would have known from trade stories and gifted skins, then it is an emblem carried far and honored for power. If it is a panther, we are in the territory of night hunters and guardians of thresholds. If it is an underwater serpent or a horned water panther, we step into cosmologies where the underworld flows beneath lakes and rivers, and where great beings turn the seasons, churn the storms, and must be petitioned or praised. The open jaw is a clue no translation can ignore, a mouth that boasts, warns, devours, or births. That ambiguity is not a flaw, it is a tool. A ritual landscape thrives on symbols large enough to hold a crowd's many needs. What did people do here? Without burials, the evidence points to ceremony, seasonal rites, offerings laid and lifted, perhaps observances of horizon events. When sun or moon slipped into a notch, the builders knew by heart. The ridge itself acts as an instrument, line of sight, angle, and altitude, shaping what the sky can say. Imagine a procession cresting the slope at dusk, the creature's silhouette dark against a field of copper light, a singer's voice carrying into the valley below. Meaning happens in such frames where the built form and the seen world lock together and yield a third thing. An experience that becomes memory, then tradition. It took a village to make this guardian. No metal blades, no wheels, only digging sticks, woven baskets, shoulders, and time. The labor testifies to importance as surely as any inscription. And while the effigy keeps its silence, the community that raised it left a readable logic. Place the being high where it can see. Shape it so that body becomes message. Return often enough that the path itself remembers your feet. Today, the alligator effigy mound is quieter than its famous sibling in Adams County, but no less eloquent. Preserved as a public park and archaeological landmark, it asks for respect as much as curiosity. Interpretive signs sketch what scholarship can say. Collaborations with native communities shape how the site is tended and taught. If Serpent Mound is a cosmic sentence, this effigy is a single, potent word spoken at the edge of a valley, a guardian uttered in earth. Still holding its post, stand beside its open jaws and look out. The land steadies, the wind writes slow. In that pause, you can almost hear the ceremony beginning again. From the Granville Ridge, follow Ohio's waterways like braided threads, and you will arrive at a city built on a confluence. And once, upon ceremony, at Marietta, where the Muskingum joins the Ohio in Washington County, an ancient complex rose and spread, platform mounds and geometric enclosures connected by ditches and processional ways, a ceremonial topography that turned riverbanks into thresholds. Constructed between roughly 100 BCE and 400 CE by the Hopewell culture, the Marietta Earthworks operated as a kind of river temple, a place where people gathered to mark seasons, honor the dead, and translate cosmology into measured ground. Early American surveyors in the late 18th century recorded what they found here with a mix of astonishment and calculation, rectangles, circles, and the remains of broad, engineered avenues that staged entry and exit with ritual intent. Time, however, chose an uneven ledger. As the modern town grew, streets and houses overran large portions of the original plan, thinning the ceremonial grammar to a few surviving clauses. Yet what remains speaks with the same authority we have heard elsewhere in the Hopewell world. Within today's Mound Cemetery, Conus Mound still rises about 30 feet high and nearly 100 feet across its rounded form, holding the memory of a burial monument likely reserved for persons of high status or spiritual responsibility. Not far away, Quadranao, often, historically, misrendered as Quadrone or Capolim. Quadranao stands as a flat-topped platform mound, whose level summit hints at a wooden structure once raised there. A temple, a leadership dais, a house for rites whose smoke stitched sky to earth. Imagine the place before encroachment. Parallel walls guiding feet in slow procession, embankments that did not fortify so much as purify, separating the sacred from the everyday, gateways that framed first sight of river gleam or solstice light at just the right angle. In the Hopewell built with layered soils, engineering their walls and platforms for durability and shape. And they situated the complex exactly where rivers teach the eye about confluence and the ear about continual return. In many indigenous cosmologies, the meeting of waters is not simply geography. It is a liminal seam, a place where worlds converse. To stage ceremony here is to perform at a portal. As at Mound City and Seip, the ritual economy at Marietta brought distant materials into close conversation. Though the surviving mounds have not yielded the same wealth of artifacts on public display, the broader Hopewell pattern holds. Copper hammered thin as light, mica sheets cut into symbols that would have flashed in fire, obsidian blades that carried the Rockies' night into Ohio's day, marine shells lifted from Gulf tides and sent inland along lines of kin and ceremony. These were not trophies in a hoard. They were instruments in a score played for the dead and for the living who remembered them. The 19th and 20th centuries were less gentle. Roads were graded where avenues once breathed. Buildings rose where wooden ritual houses had once burned and been sealed beneath earth. Yet Marietta's story did not disappear. It bifurcated. Some features were absorbed into the city's founding plan. Others were protected by civic pride and early antiquarian fascination. Mound Cemetery, in particular, became a rare palimpsest, a burial ground where the graves of American pioneers mix uneasily with the far older native mound they encircle, the coexistence forcing a conversation about continuity, loss, and layered belonging. Walk there today and the surviving mounds still order your steps. Interpretive signs sketch the vanished precincts. Maps overlay what is with what was. The river shines in glimpses through trees like a patient witness. If Newark is a lunar manuscript and Mound City a script of fire, Marietta is a doorway half remembered, half restored between water and ceremony. It reminds us that Hopewell genius was as much about choosing the right stage as composing the play. Set the platform where two rivers meet, draw the lines that guide the body to stillness, and let the world do the rest. We have traced the grand and the well-known. Now we turn to the quieter survivals, at the edges of fields and forests. Sites less visited, no less eloquent. Where a figure-8 mound puzzles the eye, a solitary dome keeps its secret, and a modest rise on a glacial ridge watches a valley like a sentinel. Not every chapter in Ohio's ancient story shouts from a grand enclosure. Some whisper from field edges and wooded knolls, asking you to lean closer. South of the big ceremonial centers, three quieter sites, Arlog, Ratcliffe, and Burchell hold their ground like footnotes that change the way you read the whole text. They are modest in scale, but each presses a question that the larger monuments can't answer alone. How did everyday communities smaller, scattered, and closer to the grain of the land shape sacred time for themselves? Begin with the Arlog Mounds in Pickaway County, two conjoined domes fused into a rare figure-8. The form is Adena at heart. Those early mound builders who flourished roughly 1000 BCE to 200 BCE, and the design is startling precisely because it resists the solitary norm. Adena conical mounds typically stand alone, but here twin lobes lean into each other as if sharing a spine. Why? Perhaps the mounds rose in stages around related burials, a leader and a successor, two lines of a single lineage, or ceremonies that needed to remain distinct yet inseparable. Or perhaps the shape embodies a cosmological dualism, paired forces in balance, seasons in dialogue, life and afterlife threaded together. And as at other Adena sites, the likely sequence hides beneath the surface, a prepared floor, or a wooden charnel house. Rites of laying out or cremation, then the intentionally burned structure sealed under lifts of earth. Our lodge has not yielded a museum's worth of artifacts, but its very geometry argues for intention over accident, a design the